The coffee hit me before I even understood what she'd done. Hot liquid splashed across my chest and soaked straight through my sweater. The heat stung my skin. For a second, the kitchen went completely silent except for the drip, drip, drip of coffee hitting the hardwood floor. And my husband looked at me and said, almost tired, almost bored, "Emily, just do what she wants." That was the moment my marriage ended. Not later when the lawyers got involved. Not when he packed his things. Right there in my own kitchen with my stepdaughter glaring at me like I was some stranger who had wandered into her house. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how it actually happened. It was a Tuesday morning in early April in Carmel, Indiana. Cold enough that you still needed a sweater, but warm enough that the snow had finally disappeared from the edges of the sidewalks. Our kitchen window faced the backyard. The dogwoods were just starting to bloom. Normally I liked mornings in that house. I'd lived there for almost 12 years. Gary had only lived there for 5. And Brittany had arrived 3 years earlier and somehow never left. I was standing at the counter pouring coffee into my mug when Brittany walked in like a storm rolling through the door. She didn't say good morning. She never did. Her phone was already in her hand, tapping fast, eyes locked on the screen like the rest of the world was just background noise. "Emily," she said without even looking up, "I need your credit card." Not "can I borrow?" Not "could you help me?" Just "I need it." I kept pouring my coffee. "For what?" She sighed loudly like I'd just asked the most annoying question on earth. "It's just something I have to cover today." That phrase again. Something. The last something had been a pair of boots that cost $600. The one before that was a weekend trip to Nashville she never paid back. Before that, $300 in takeout orders charged through my delivery account. So I said something I hadn't said nearly enough over the past few years. Number. That got her attention. She looked up slowly like she wasn't quite sure she'd heard me correctly. "What?" I said, "No," I repeated. "I'm not giving you my card." Her expression hardened. "Why not?" "Because you're 27 years old. Because you've had 3 jobs in the past year and walked out of every single one. Because I'm not your personal bank." But instead I said something calmer. "You still owe me money from the last 3 times. She rolled her eyes. "Oh my God, are we really doing this again?" "Yes," I said, "we are." That's when Gary walked in. He'd just come back from walking the dog. His jacket still smelled faintly like cold air and the cedar mulch from the flower beds outside. He looked between the two of us the way he always did when Brittany and I argued. Like a man walking into a room where he already knew he didn't want to get involved. "What's going on?" he asked. "Emily won't give me her card," Brittany snapped. Gary rubbed the back of his neck. "What do you need it for?" he asked her. "Just something I have to pay today." That same vague answer. Gary glanced at me. I could already see where this was going. "Maybe just help her out this once," he said quietly. I felt something tighten in my chest. "Gary, she still hasn't paid me back for the last few things." "She will," he said. Brittany crossed her arms. "I said I will." "You said that last time too." Her voice rose. "Why are you being like this?" I stared at her. "Being like what?" "Responsible. Adult. The kind of person who pays her own bills." "I'm not giving you the card," I said. That's when everything exploded. Brittany grabbed the mug sitting on the counter beside her. It was my mug, a white ceramic one Gary and I had bought years earlier on a weekend trip to Door County. Before Brittany had moved in. Before everything got complicated. The next second the mug was flying through the air. Hot coffee hit my chest. I gasped and stepped back. The mug shattered on the floor. For a moment nobody moved. Then Brittany shouted, "Give me the money or get out." Her voice echoed through the kitchen. I turned to Gary. I honestly thought he would finally step in. Finally tell her she'd crossed a line. But he didn't. He looked tired. Annoyed. Like the whole thing was just one more inconvenience in his morning. And then he said it. "Emily, just do what she wants." I remember staring at him. Not angry at first. Just stunned. "Are you serious?" I asked. He shrugged. "It's easier." Easier. That word hung in the air like smoke. For Brittany, easier meant someone else paying. For Gary, easier meant avoiding conflict. For me, apparently easier meant surrendering my dignity. Brittany smirked. "See," she said, "even Dad knows you're overreacting." The coffee was still dripping down my sweater. It had started to cool, but the fabric stuck uncomfortably to my skin. I grabbed a dish towel from the counter and pressed it against my chest. Nobody said anything for a few seconds. Then I heard myself speak. "Okay." Gary blinked. "Okay, what?" "Okay," I said again. I walked past them toward the hallway. Emily Gary called after me. I didn't answer. I went upstairs to our bedroom, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed. My hands were shaking. Not from anger. From clarity. Because something had finally become obvious. This house might legally belong to me. But emotionally, I had already been pushed out. Downstairs, I could hear Brittany talking loudly. Probably complaining about me. Gary's voice was quieter. Trying to calm her down. Trying to smooth things over. That had been his strategy for years. Keep Brittany happy. Ask me to be patient. But patience has a limit. I stood up and walked to the closet. Pulled out a small overnight bag. And started packing. 2 shirts. A pair of jeans. My laptop. Toothbrush. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to get out of the house for a few days. When I came downstairs, Brittany was sitting at the kitchen table scrolling through her phone again. Gary looked up. "Where are you going?" "Out," I said. "For how long?" "I'm not sure." Brittany laughed. "Wow. Over a little argument." I didn't respond. Gary followed me toward the front door. "Emily, come on," he said quietly. "Don't make this bigger than it is." I stopped and turned around. The burn on my skin had faded, but something deeper was still raw. "Gary," I said calmly, "you told me to do what she wants." He nodded cautiously. "Well," I said, opening the door, "this is what I want." And I walked out. At that moment, I didn't have a full plan. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do. But I knew one thing for certain. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't going to keep the peace anymore. And that decision would change everything. The first thing I noticed when I walked into the Hampton Inn room was the smell of cleaning solution. That sharp, lemony scent hotels use when they want everything to feel spotless, whether it really is or not. I closed the door behind me and stood there for a moment with my overnight bag still hanging from my shoulder. The room was quiet, completely quiet. No Brittany pacing through the kitchen on speakerphone. No Gary sighing like every conversation was too much work. Just the low hum of the air conditioner. I set my bag on the bed and sat down. For the first time since the coffee hit me that morning, the shaking started. Not dramatic shaking, just that deep trembling that creeps up when adrenaline finally runs out. I pressed my hands together and stared at the carpet. Part of me still expected my phone to ring. Gary apologizing. Gary saying Brittany had gone too far. Gary asking me to come home. Instead, my phone buzzed with a text. I picked it up. It was from him. "Emily, come home. Let's not blow this out of proportion." I stared at the message. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just that same tired tone. Like I was the one being unreasonable. I typed a response, then deleted it. Instead, I set the phone on the nightstand and leaned back against the headboard. And that's when something unexpected happened. The silence started to feel peaceful. Not lonely. Peaceful. For 3 years, the house had been full of tension. Doors slamming. Arguments about money. Brittany complaining about something every other day. But sitting there in that quiet hotel room, I suddenly realized something. I didn't miss it. Not even a little. My laptop was still in my bag. I pulled it out and opened it. At first, I told myself I was just going to check work emails. But my fingers drifted somewhere else. The banking website. Gary and I had a joint account for household expenses. I handled most of the bills, always had. Utilities. Insurance. Property taxes. Mortgage payments back when the house still had one. Gary used the account mostly for groceries and small things. At least that's what I had believed. The page loaded. I stared at the transaction list. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Electric bill. Gas station. Hardware store. Then I noticed a series of charges. Online clothing retailers. Delivery services. Ride shares. I leaned closer to the screen. The charges weren't small. 200 here. 300 there. 600. My stomach tightened. Most of them had happened in the past 8 months, and almost all of them came from accounts Brittany had used before. I opened the credit card statement. More charges. Restaurants. Boutique. Furniture stores. I started adding the numbers together on a notepad. 500. 900. 1,300. By the time I finished the column, my chest felt heavy. $15,000. That's how much Brittany had burned through over the past 2 years. Not borrowed. Burned. Because not a single dollar had ever been paid back. I sat back slowly. The room felt colder. But the financial damage wasn't even the worst part. What bothered me more was something else. Gary had never told me. Not once. Which meant he had known. And stayed quiet. I scrolled further down the account history. That's when I noticed something new. Transfers. Large ones. 2,000. 3,000. Sent to Brittany's personal account. Gary's name on the authorization? I rubbed my forehead. How long has this been going on? I murmured to myself. Then I remembered something. A strange conversation I'd overheard 2 weeks earlier. Gary had been in the living room talking on the phone. When I walked in, he quickly stepped outside. At the time, I assumed it was work. But suddenly that memory felt different. I opened our shared email account. We had created it years ago to organize household documents. Insurance statements. Appliance warranties. That sort of thing. The inbox loaded slowly. Then I searched one word. Realtor. 3 emails appeared. All from a local real estate agent named Tom Gallagher. My heartbeat picked up. I opened the first message. It was polite and professional. Tom confirming a phone call with Gary about refinancing options. I frowned. Refinancing. The house had been fully paid off for 4 years. There was no mortgage left. Why would anyone refinance a paid-off home? I opened the second email. That's when the truth landed. Gary had been asking about taking out a home equity loan. A large one. Enough to cover significant personal debts. I stared at the number. $40,000. My mouth went dry. 40,000. I scrolled further. The last email mentioned Brittany by name. Apparently, Gary had explained to the realtor that his daughter had run into financial difficulties and needed help getting back on her feet. I closed my laptop. The silence in the hotel room felt different now. Heavier. I walked over to the small window and looked out at the parking lot. A pickup truck rolled slowly through the lot. A couple walked past holding takeout bags. Normal life continuing. Meanwhile, my husband had been quietly planning to borrow tens of thousands of dollars against the house I had bought years before we ever met. The house that was legally mine. Gary had signed a prenuptial agreement before we married. He hadn't even argued about it at the time. "I'm not after your house," he'd said back then. Turns out he just planned to use it anyway. I sat back down on the bed and picked up my phone again. Another text from Gary had arrived. "Brittany says you embarrassed her today. You should apologize when you come home." I stared at the message. Then I laughed. Not a big laugh. Just one short breath of disbelief. Embarrassed her. That's what he thought the problem was. For the first time all day, the anger finally arrived. Not explosive anger. Quiet anger. The kind that clears your mind. I opened my contacts and scrolled until I found a name I hadn't used in years. David Klein. An attorney who used to handle contracts for my old company. I hesitated for a second. Then I pressed call. He answered on the third ring. "David Klein." "Hi, David," I said. "This is Emily Harper. We worked together a few years ago." There was a pause. Then recognition. "Emily, of course, how are you?" I took a slow breath. "Well, that depends." He chuckled lightly. "That doesn't sound good." "It isn't," I admitted. "But I think I might need some legal advice." His voice shifted instantly into professional mode. "What's going on?" I glanced at the laptop still sitting open on the bed. "My husband," I said, "slowly might be trying to use my house to pay off his daughter's debts." David didn't respond for a moment. Then he asked one question. "Is the property in your name only?" "Yes." "And did you sign a prenuptial agreement before the marriage?" "Yes." Another pause. Then David said something that made my pulse quicken. "Well, Emily, that simplifies things quite a bit." For the first time since that morning in the kitchen, I felt something different. Not fear. Control. And suddenly the situation didn't look quite the same anymore. David didn't rush me. That was the first thing I appreciated about him. Some lawyers jump straight into advice. Others start talking about fees before they even understand the situation. David just listened. I sat on the stiff hotel mattress with my laptop open in front of me and explained everything. The coffee incident. The credit card charges. The emails with the realtor. Gary's idea about pulling money out of the house. When I finished, there was a quiet pause on the line. Then David said calmly, "Okay, let's slow down and walk through this piece by piece." His tone was steady, practical, exactly what I needed. "First question," he said, "when did you buy the house?" 2013. "And you were single at the time?" "Yes." "Gary's name was never added to the deed." "Number?" "Good. Good." That word felt strange but reassuring. "Second question," David continued. "The prenup. Do you still have a copy?" "Yes." "I want you to read the section about real property." I pulled the file folder out of my bag. I'd brought it with me out of habit more than anything. I was the type of person who kept paperwork organized. Inside the folder was the signed prenuptial agreement from 5 years earlier. I flipped to the page David mentioned. My eyes moved across the paragraph. "Property owned prior to marriage shall remain the sole property of the original owner." David let me finish reading. "See it?" he asked. "Yes." "That house is yours, period." Something loosened in my chest. "But Gary lives there," I said. "Living somewhere doesn't make it yours," David replied. "Legally speaking, he's just a resident." Resident. That word landed differently than I expected. For years I had treated Gary like a full partner in the house. Shared decisions. Shared access. Shared trust. Legally, though, he had far fewer rights than I'd assumed. "What about Brittany?" I asked. David gave a quiet laugh. "She has even fewer." For the first time that day, I smiled. A small one, but still. David continued. "Now the bigger issue is the financial activity you mentioned. Unauthorized charges, transfers, attempted refinancing." "Yes. That's where things get serious." I leaned forward slightly. "What can I do?" David didn't hesitate. "First, protect your finances." "How?" "Separate accounts. Freeze credit cards if necessary. Make sure your paycheck isn't going into any account Gary can access." "I can do that." "Second," he continued, "document everything." "I already started." "Good. Screenshots, statements, emails, save it all." I glanced at the laptop again. "Third," he said, "we discuss your options regarding the house." I waited. "Since the property is yours alone, you have the right to remove anyone living there if the relationship ends." My stomach fluttered. "You mean eviction?" "Yes, a legal one." I imagined Gary and Brittany standing in the driveway while someone handed them paperwork. The image was oddly satisfying, but also terrifying. "I don't know if I'm ready for something that drastic," I admitted. David's tone softened slightly. "That's understandable. But remember something, Emily." "What?" "They've already crossed some pretty serious lines." I thought about the credit card statements. $15,000. The refinance email. 40,000 more. David continued. "If Gary had successfully taken out that loan, you'd be responsible for the consequences, even if the money went to Brittany." My throat tightened. "I know. And from what you've described, it doesn't sound like either of them plans to stop." I closed my eyes for a second. He was right. Brittany had never stopped. Gary had never stopped enabling her. Why would that suddenly change? "Let me ask you something," David said. "Okay. Do you want to stay married to Gary?" The question hung in the air. I hadn't really allowed myself to think about it yet. 5 years of marriage. 3 years of Brittany living with us. Thousands of small compromises. And that moment in the kitchen. Just do what she wants. I opened my eyes. "No," I said quietly. David didn't react with surprise. "All right," he said. The calmness in his voice made the decision feel real. "So here's what we do next." He outlined the plan step by step. File for legal separation. Protect my finances. Prepare documentation. And if necessary, remove Gary and Brittany from the house. The process sounded almost boring when he explained it. Forms. Notices. waiting periods. But something about that boring structure felt powerful. Because Brittany lived on chaos. Gary lived on avoidance. Neither of them expected consequences. David finished the explanation. "Think it over tonight," he said. "We'll talk again tomorrow." "Thank you," I said. After the call ended, I sat quietly for a long moment. The room felt different now. Still quiet. Still sterile. But my mind had shifted. Earlier, I had felt like someone who had just been thrown out of her own life. Now I realized something else. I had walked out. Voluntarily. And that meant I could decide what happened next. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Gary. "Are you seriously staying at a hotel over this? Brittany is still upset." I stared at the screen. Then another message appeared. "You embarrassed her." That word again. Embarrassed. Not burned. Not attacked. Embarrassed. I typed a reply. Then stopped. David's advice echoed in my head. Document everything. Don't escalate emotionally. So instead of arguing, I simply saved the messages. Screenshot. File. Evidence. For the first time, I was treating the situation like a problem to solve instead of a fight to win. I stood up and walked to the bathroom. The coffee stain had faded from my sweater, but the fabric still felt stiff. I changed into a clean shirt and rinsed my face. When I looked in the mirror, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. Not anger. Not sadness. Determination. Back in the room, I opened the laptop again. New bank account. Password changes. Credit freeze request. One by one, I started putting barriers between my money and the people who had been quietly draining it. Each small action felt like tightening a bolt. Secure. Controlled. By midnight, the basic protections were in place. I closed the laptop and leaned back against the pillows. The hotel room lights were dim. Outside traffic hummed faintly on the interstate. My phone buzzed once more. Gary again. "When are you coming home?" I stared at the message for a long time. Then I finally replied, "I'm not sure yet." 3 little dots appeared as he started typing, then disappeared, then appeared again. But no new message came. I set the phone down. Tomorrow I would talk to David again. Tomorrow the real planning would begin. But tonight something important had already happened. For the first time since Brittany moved into that house, I wasn't reacting to their chaos anymore. I was thinking, planning, and that it turned out was far more dangerous. The next morning I woke up earlier than I expected. For a few seconds I didn't remember where I was. The ceiling was unfamiliar. The air conditioner hummed softly in the corner. Then everything came back. The kitchen. The coffee. Gary's voice telling me to do what Brittany wanted. I sat up slowly. My phone was on the nightstand. No missed calls, no apology messages overnight. Just silence. I showered, dressed, and went downstairs to the hotel lobby. They had the standard free breakfast scrambled eggs that looked a little too yellow, sausage links and coffee in those big silver dispensers. I poured myself a cup and sat by the window. For years, mornings had meant tension in the house. Brittany stomping through the kitchen. Gary trying to keep everyone calm. But that morning, the only sound around me was a couple of retirees discussing their road trip to Tennessee. Normal life. It felt strangely comforting. My phone rang around 9. David. "Morning, Emily." "Morning. Did you sleep?" "A little." "That's good enough," he said. We went over the next steps again, this time in more detail. Legal separation paperwork. Financial documentation. Property rights. But the part that mattered most was the house. Because Gary isn't on the deed, David explained he doesn't have ownership. That gives you options. What kind of options? You can ask him to leave voluntarily, David said. I thought about Gary's personality. Avoid conflict. Delay decisions. Hope problems disappear. He wasn't going to leave. And if he refuses, I asked. Then we proceed formally. That meant eviction. The word still felt heavy, but also strangely fair. They've had 3 years of your patience, David said. You're not doing anything unreasonable. After the call, I sat for a while thinking. Then I drove across town to my bank. The branch manager, a woman named Karen Mitchell, had helped me with accounts before. When I explained that I needed a new account opened privately, she didn't ask many questions. Separating finances, she asked gently. Yes. She nodded. We see that more often than you'd think. Within an hour, my paycheck deposit was redirected and the shared credit cards were frozen. When I walked out of the bank, the sun felt brighter. Another small piece of control restored. The next few days moved quickly. David's office prepared the legal paperwork. I gathered every document connected to the house and our finances. Credit card statements, email records, bank transfers. The numbers told a story I had ignored for too long. Brittany's spending. Gary quietly covering for her. Thousands of dollars disappearing. But the part that shocked David most was the refinance email. They were going to use your house as collateral, he said. Without asking. He nodded slowly. That strengthens your position. I drove past the house once during those days. Just once. The dogwoods in the front yard were fully blooming now. Brittany's car sat in the driveway. Gary's truck beside it. Everything looked normal. But the house didn't feel like mine anymore. Not yet. That would change soon. David called again 2 days later. Everything is ready, he said. For what? For the next step. I sat down at my kitchen table in the small apartment my sister had offered me temporarily. What exactly happens, I asked. First we file the separation notice, David explained. Then we remove them from the property. The directness of his words still startled me. How? Legally, he said, calmly, with witnesses. He explained the logistics. A licensed moving company, a locksmith, and a civil process server. Someone authorized to deliver legal documents and ensure everything followed proper procedure. What's his name, I asked. Officer Daniel Miller, David said, retired sheriff's deputy, very professional. The image formed in my mind. A calm man in a suit holding a clipboard. The exact opposite of Brittany's chaotic energy. When does this happen, I asked. Whenever you're ready. Ready. That word sat heavily in my chest. Part of me still struggled with the idea. 5 years of marriage. Shared holidays. Shared memories. But then I remembered Gary standing in the kitchen while his daughter threw hot liquid at me. And telling me to give in. I took a slow breath. Let's do it. David didn't hesitate. All right. The plan was set for the following Tuesday afternoon. Gary worked late that day. Brittany usually left around noon to meet friends. The timing was perfect. The movers would arrive first. Everything belonging to Gary and Brittany would be carefully packed and placed in a storage unit for 30 days, fully documented, so nobody could accuse me of damaging their property. The locksmith would change the locks. Officer Miller would deliver the legal paperwork. Everything clean. Everything legal. Everything final. The night before it happened, I barely slept. I kept imagining Gary's reaction. Confusion first. Then anger. Brittany's reaction was easier to picture. Explosive. But for once that chaos wouldn't matter. Because this time the situation wouldn't be controlled by emotion. It would be controlled by the law. Tuesday arrived faster than I expected. My sister drove me over that afternoon. We parked 2 houses down so we wouldn't attract attention. A white moving truck was already in the driveway. 2 movers carried boxes down the front steps with quiet efficiency. Inside the house, furniture was being wrapped and labeled. Everything looked oddly calm. Officer Miller stood near the front porch. Gray suit. Short gray hair. Clipboard tucked under his arm. Exactly the kind of man Brittany would underestimate. He nodded politely when he saw me. Mrs. Harper. Yes. Everything is proceeding according to schedule. His voice was low and steady. Professional. The locksmith worked quickly, removing the old locks and installing new ones. I sat in my sister's SUV watching the house. My heart pounded. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was I really doing this? Ending a marriage this way? But then I remembered something simple. Gary had chosen his side long before this day. I was just finally choosing mine. About an hour later, the movers finished. Boxes lined the porch neatly. Officer Miller checked his watch. Your husband should be arriving soon. Right on cue, a familiar pickup truck turned onto the street. Gary's truck. Behind it, Brittany's car. The moment had arrived. And for the first time since the coffee incident, I felt completely calm. Gary's truck rolled slowly into the driveway. Brittany's car followed right behind it, music thumping faintly through the open windows. She always played it too loud. For a second, neither of them seemed to notice anything unusual. Then Gary saw the moving truck. His truck stopped halfway up the driveway. Brittany parked behind him and leaned out her window. "What's going on?" she said. Gary stepped out of the truck slowly. He looked toward the porch. The stacked boxes. The movers closing the back of the truck. And Officer Miller standing quietly near the front steps. Gary frowned. "What the hell?" Brittany slammed her car door and marched toward the house. "What is this?" she demanded. Officer Miller remained calm. "Good afternoon." "Who are you?" Brittany snapped. "My name is Daniel Miller," he said evenly. "I'm here on behalf of Mrs. Emily Harper." Brittany froze. Gary's eyes widened slightly. "Emily," he said. At that moment, I stepped out of my sister's SUV. Both of them turned toward me. Gary looked confused more than anything else. "Emily, what's going on?" Brittany didn't even try to hide her anger. "Are you kidding me right now?" Officer Miller stepped forward and handed Gary a thick envelope. "Sir, these documents explain the situation." Gary took the envelope slowly. "What documents?" "Legal separation filing and property notice." Gary blinked. "You're joking." "No, sir." Brittany tried to push past him toward the door. "Whatever this is, I'm going inside." The locksmith still working near the porch stood up. "Sorry," he said calmly. "Locks have been changed." Brittany stared at the door. "What?" She grabbed the handle and twisted. "Nothing." "What the hell?" she shouted, pounding on the door. Gary opened the envelope with shaking hands. He skimmed the first page. Then the second. His face turned pale. "Emily, what is this?" I walked closer, keeping my voice steady. "It's the legal paperwork, Gary." "Paperwork for what?" "For ending this." Brittany spun around. "You can't do this." Officer Miller spoke again, his tone still calm. "Ma'am, the property belongs solely to Mrs. Harper. Your belongings have been placed in temporary storage. The address and access instructions are included in the documents." Brittany looked like she might explode. "This is insane." Gary looked between me and the papers. "You evicted us." "Legally," I said. "You didn't even talk to me." I held his gaze. "I tried for 3 years." That stopped him for a moment. Brittany was still pacing. "You're unbelievable," she said, over a stupid argument. "It wasn't about the argument." "Oh, please," she scoffed. Officer Miller cleared his throat slightly. "Sir, you may also want to review the section regarding financial activity." Gary looked down again. His eyes moved across the page. Then he looked back up. "Emily, what is this list?" "Credit card charges," I said. Brittany's pacing slowed. Gary flipped through the papers. "There's thousands of dollars here." "Yes." Brittany's voice suddenly dropped. "You went through my purchases." "They weren't your purchases," I said calmly. "They were mine." Gary looked stunned. "Brittany, is this accurate?" She crossed her arms defensively. "Dad, she said I could use it." "No," I said. "I never said that." Gary looked back at the paperwork. Then another page. "This says unauthorized transactions." Officer Miller nodded slightly. "That section documents financial misuse that may be relevant if further legal action becomes necessary." Brittany's confidence cracked. "What does that mean?" "It means," Officer Miller said calmly, "that if the account holder chooses to pursue the matter, law enforcement could review the charges." Brittany's face drained of color. Gary looked back at me. "You'd call the police on her?" "I haven't," I said. "But I could." The silence that followed was heavy. Even the neighbors had started paying attention. Across the street, Mrs. Jensen had paused while watering her front flowers. 2 houses down, someone's garage door had opened halfway. Gary rubbed his forehead. "This is insane," he murmured. I shook my head. "No, Gary." For the first time, my voice carried real strength. "What's insane is thinking you could take a loan against my house without telling me." Gary froze. "How do you know about that?" I gave him a small, tired smile. "Emails." His shoulders slumped. Brittany looked back and forth between us. "What loan?" Gary didn't answer. I continued. "You were planning to borrow $40,000. Gary stared at the ground. "To help Brittany," I finished. Brittany looked shocked. "Wait, you were actually going to do that?" Gary's voice was quiet. "I was trying to help you." She suddenly looked uncertain. But I didn't feel angry anymore. Just clear. Gary, I said calmly, 5 years ago, you told me you married me because you respected the life I built. He didn't look up. But every time Brittany demanded something, you asked me to give more. I gestured toward the house behind him. That house was my safety, my retirement, my stability. Gary finally looked up. I was going to pay it back. With what? He didn't answer. Brittany suddenly spoke again. This is still ridiculous, she said weakly. You can't just throw us out. Officer Miller glanced at his watch. Ma'am, you have access to your belongings in storage. The unit is prepaid for 30 days. Gary folded the paperwork slowly. Emily, where are we supposed to go? I thought about that for a moment, then answered honestly. That's not my responsibility anymore. The words felt strange, but also freeing. Brittany looked furious again. You're heartless. I shook my head gently. No, I was patient. For years. Gary stood there silently. Then he nodded once. A small defeated motion. I guess I didn't think you'd actually do something like this. That's the problem, I said. You never thought I would. Officer Miller stepped back slightly. Sir, if you have further questions, you can contact the attorney listed in the documents. Gary looked at the house one more time. Then back at me. Are you really done? Yes. No hesitation this time. He nodded again, then walked slowly toward his truck. Brittany stood frozen for a few seconds longer. Finally, she grabbed a box from the porch. This is unbelievable, she muttered. But she didn't yell anymore. The fight had gone out of her voice. Within minutes, both vehicles were backing out of the driveway. Gary drove away first. Brittany followed. And just like that, the chaos that had filled my life for 3 years drove down the street and disappeared around the corner. Officer Miller turned to me. Everything appears to be resolved. I exhaled slowly. Yes. For the first time in years. The house behind me was quiet. For the first few minutes after Gary and Brittany drove away, I just stood there in the driveway. The street looked exactly the same as it had an hour earlier. Dogwoods blooming, a lawnmower humming somewhere down the block. Mrs. Jensen across the street pretending she was still watering her flowers, even though the hose had been pointed at the same patch of grass for 5 minutes. Normal life. But something inside me felt different. Lighter. Officer Miller closed his clipboard. Well, Mrs. Harper, he said, that went about as smoothly as these things ever do. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Thank you for being here. He nodded politely. Just doing my job. The movers finished loading the last pieces of furniture and drove away. The locksmith handed me the new keys. Everything's set, he said. I turned the key in the front door. The house opened with a soft click. When I stepped inside, the silence felt almost unfamiliar. For 3 years, there had always been noise. Brittany arguing on the phone. Music blasting from her bedroom. Gary pacing through the kitchen, trying to keep everyone calm. Now the house simply existed. Quiet. Still. Peaceful. I walked slowly through the living room. Some spaces looked different where Brittany's things had been. Her bright pink chair was gone. The pile of shopping boxes near the stairs had disappeared. The kitchen looked cleaner than it had in months. I set my purse on the counter. For a moment, I just stood there looking around. 5 years earlier, when Gary and I got married, I had imagined this house becoming a shared life. 2 adults building something steady together. Maybe hosting Thanksgiving. Maybe traveling more once retirement got closer. Instead, things had slowly turned into something else. Compromise after compromise. Excuse after excuse. Each time Brittany crossed a line, Gary asked me to be patient. Just this once. But just once had turned into years. I walked over to the window above the sink. The same window I'd been standing at the morning Brittany threw the coffee. The memory didn't sting the way it had a few days earlier. It felt distant now. Almost like something that had happened in another house. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from Gary. I hesitated before opening it. Emily, I'm sorry things got this far. I read the sentence twice. Then the next line. I should have handled things differently. I waited for the usual follow-up. Some explanation. Some excuse. But the message ended there. No blame. No argument. Just that. I thought about responding. For a moment, the old instinct returned. The instinct to smooth things over, to make the conversation easier. But then I remembered something simple. For years, I had been the only one working to keep things stable. Now it was time to stop. I locked the phone and set it down. Later that afternoon, my sister came by. She stepped into the living room and looked around. Well, she said, it's quiet. Very quiet. She smiled a little. Good quiet or weird quiet? I thought about that. Then I laughed softly. Good quiet. We sat at the kitchen table drinking iced tea. The kind of normal conversation I hadn't had in a long time. Work. Family news. The neighbor's dog that barked too much. Ordinary life. Over the next few weeks, I settled back into the house. I changed every password connected to my finances, canceled the shared credit cards, moved Gary's remaining mail to a forwarding address David arranged through his office. I repainted the bedroom a soft gray that Gary had always said looked too cold. Turns out I liked it. The evenings became peaceful. Sometimes I read. Sometimes I watched old movies. Sometimes I just sat on the back porch and listened to the wind moving through the trees. Gary sent a few more messages during those weeks. Mostly apologies. A few attempts to talk. I didn't respond. Not out of anger. Just because there wasn't anything left to discuss. Brittany tried something different. One evening, a friend called to tell me Brittany had posted a long rant on social media about being betrayed by family. But the post didn't stay up long. Apparently, someone had asked about the credit card charges. And that conversation ended quickly. Life moved on. Months later, when the legal separation was finalized, the house felt completely mine again. Not just legally. Emotionally. One morning, I stood in the kitchen making breakfast. Sunlight came through the window over the sink. The same place where everything had fallen apart months earlier. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee. This time I drank it slowly. In silence. No tension. No arguments waiting around the corner. Just quiet. And for the first time in years, I realized something. Peace doesn't come from keeping everyone happy. Sometimes peace comes from finally deciding you matter too. If you've ever been in a situation where keeping the peace meant giving up your dignity, you probably know how heavy that feeling can be. And if this story reminded you that it's okay to draw the line and take your life back, I'm glad you were here to hear it. Take care of yourself.